Hare Krishna. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Delighted to be joined today by Hrdayananda Maharaj. And Maharaj, I wanted to say a special thank you. We've got some controversial topics. The limits of GBC authority, just how accountable are they? What should, a CPO look like within our society to be truly reflective of our society's values, best practice? What should the experience be for a victim or a discloser, a reporter? And why is due process important? Thank you, Maharaj, for being willing to grab the nettle. A lot of your colleagues might not have been so bold. What enables you to be so bold and embrace these topics like this?
Well, I'll try to give an answer without praising myself. I think it's important. They're important topics. And as one of there was a novel by John Grisham, that author, called The Firm, in which there's this big law firm and rich law firm. The members keep vanishing and turning up dead. And so, very much against my wishes, I am one of the last of the, let's say, the very senior preachers in Prabhupada's service. So, and I just feel responsible. I care about people, and I certainly care about those who have come to Krishna for shelter. And Prabhupada, I say it's Prabhupada's inspiration. Prabhupada himself gave an incredible example. He worked harder than we did. He preached, he stayed up later and got up earlier and cared more about the world than we did. And he inspired us, at least myself, that I understood the purpose of my life is to serve this great mission. There's nothing I can do with my life which will be as valuable for me or for the world other than trying to follow this extraordinary example. And if ISKCON was going really well, I would love to just go to some beautiful place and write books. And but that's not the case. I think there are serious problems in ISKCON, not problems so severe that they, I would say, delegitimize Prabhupada's mission, but they are serious problems. And what I strongly embrace and what I tell other devotees is that the more problems we have in ISKCON, the more I feel Prabhupada needs me. And because I know from all the time I spent with Prabhupada, I know exactly what he would say to me, that if you see these problems, I gave my life to build up this institution. And if you see these problems, why don't you help me? Why do you abandon me when I most need you? And so I'm just doing all I can, at times controversially, to try to make ISKCON as far as I can, or encourage devotees to make ISKCON what Prabhupada wanted.
Thank you, Maharaj. And sunlight is the best disinfectant. What do you think it is that explains the reticence of many of your colleagues on the GBC, or former colleagues or contemporaries, from joining these conversations? It feels like a lot of them resist, decline, prefer to not engage.
Well, I'd like to answer that without criticizing others. I don't know if I can. One thing is, when Prabhupada was here, it was, I think, more of a merit system. I mean, the GBC nowadays just does things, or probably even worse, fails to do things that Prabhupada would just not tolerate. And so I think having people appointed for life, there's no quality control. I mean, as long as you don't smoke cigars or rape a woman or whatever, get caught in McDonald's, with a burger. I mean, basically, if you just follow the basic principles, there's no level of I would say, well, I don't want to exaggerate, but you can be very incompetent and you'll still be there for life. And there's very little quality control. I personally, I mean, I'm quite familiar with, well, to some extent familiar with Latin America. And, you know, many times I've written to the JVC, I've written to justice ministers, I've written to all kinds of people about really just situations of egregious mismanagement or failure to manage or injustice. And it's sort of, it's almost like this Dickensian, you know, Charles Dickens, like in that, what's that, that Little Dorrit, I
Oliver
think.
Twist.
No, this one's Little Dorrit, where he talks about the this unforgettable spoof of like British bureaucracy. And so, I mean, I could go into all the historical reasons, whatever, but yeah, I don't think the GBC is illegitimate in terms of political science or whatever. There's a distinction between incompetent and illegitimate. And I suppose you can reach a certain level of incompetence that you really delegitimize yourself. I don't think the GBC is there. I think they're basically, most of them, sincere. They're doing their best. They are not completely incompetent. They get certain things done. ISKCON, you know, surviving, but it's not a high level of competence. And
So sorry.
well, I can't. I was just to finish up. So again, they're not illegitimate, but I just don't think. I think there's a real lack of brilliant or expert management.
I caught your broadcast the other day. You were talking about the recent decision to maintain a moratorium on Vaishnavis being afforded the opportunity to initiate. And you were making the point there that there were times Srila Prabhupada would put the GBC on hold, would reverse a decision. There was a sense of accountability. Let's explore just for a moment why this particular decision, and there's a couple of components to it. First of all, despite Shastric Advisory Council's advice, there is no prohibition in Lord Chaitanya's teachings around women initiating. That's part one. We've still decided to put that on hold. Part two, we've yielded to political pressure from the Indian Bureau. Both of these raise big questions about GBC checks and balances, basis of decision making, and so on. Let's explore, first of all, why this decision is potentially very harmful to the movement, holding women back from participating as gurus despite Prabhupada's invitation to them.
And despite historical precedent.
Despite historical precedences. Why is this, what harms might ensue? Why is this such a bad decision?
There is a little phrase in Sanskrit that comes up twice in the Bhagavatam. Once it's mentioned in praise of Bhishma when he's on the bed of arrows. The other time it's spoken by Narada Muni to Dhruva Maharaj when Dhruva accepts him as a guru. And so the phrase is Desha Kala Vibhagavit. Should I write it in the chat or?
If you like, Maharaj, we can even source it on Vedabase or something and drop it in.
Yeah, the verse number is 4.8. No, sorry, it's 4.8.54.
54.
Yes, verse 54.
Okay, I'll bring it up.
And so in his purport, Prabhupada says that we should take all risks. We should make all adjustments so that Krishna consciousness is palatable, so that it's comfortable for Western people. And he says that people that are puffed up, Prabhupada's words, puffed up with concocted notions, say that everything has to be done in the West like in India. Although in India, there's hundreds of women gurus. And so one point I've made over and over again in my talks is that the traditional enemies of the Vaishnavas, perhaps even more than the impersonalists, have been the Smartas. And the word Smarta comes from, of course, from the word Smriti, because there's all these sort of ultimately not very important ritual texts and everything. And those are the ones that and so I think the people opposing women gurus are the descendants of the Smartas, who are the traditional opponents of Vaishnavas. And I think they're in the bodily concept of life, frankly, just my view. And I think there's not one person who is opposing women gurus who actually has demonstrated in the Western world and even Eastern Europe, I might not include to some extent, but has demonstrated an ability to widely attract Western people to Prabhupada's mission. So, and I was just speaking to a Latin American group today. There's no, as you said, there's no Shastra conjunction against it, and it's not a basic principle. In order to be a spiritual scientist, one has to understand Rupa Goswami's and Prabhupada's distinction between basic principles and details. Clearly, it's a detail, and it varies according to the particular historical culture one finds oneself in.
What harms do you think will naturally come about, both to the Sampradaya in terms of accommodating potentially a false teaching, or at least compromising on a standard Lord Chaitanya has established? What to speak of to the mission in the Western world? So
I think it's just basically the Western mission as it is now is failing. I mean, Prabhupada built up a very powerful Western mission, which, devotees have managed to whittle down to sort of a forgotten and largely irrelevant remnant of what Prabhupada did. It used to be, you went to any major city, certainly in America, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and you would find powerful Vaishnava Prabhupada communities. And now, of course, you don't find that. It's very hard to find a powerful Western Vaishnava community in any major Western city. And so as a historian, in other words, the Prabhupada's mission, which he said would save the world, Prabhupada explicitly told us the reason he didn't get off the Jaladuta, the reason he got on the Jaladuta was because he recognized the influence of Western culture in the modern world, and that his entire global strategy depended on big success in the West. That was Prabhupada's strategy. There was no other strategy to save the planet. And so when the Western mission is dramatically reduced the way it is now, and not allowing women to do service for which they're qualified, will basically seal the deal. I mean, I think it'll be almost impossible to ever rebuild Prabhupada's mission the way he wanted it, and therefore Prabhupada's whole world strategy fails. So that's what I think. I think what's at stake, the planet.
And it's an example, as you say, of a decision that they even made against their own preferred position, purely in response to pressure, a serious threat, secession, loss of the Indian temples, or at least loss of control of the Indian temples. How are we to sort of reconcile this with ultimate managerial authority? Because it seems that they're willing to almost...
The GBC is getting dangerously close to doing the very thing that destroyed the Gaudiya Math. The reason Prabhupada emphasized so strongly, first, as you know, the first statement in his last will and testament, the GBC is the ultimate managing authority for the entire ISKCON, is because he didn't want history to repeat. So to me, the India Bureau, the very fact that it was the only country on earth that refused to put within the bylaws of their various corporations that that the GBC is the ultimate authority, as we did everywhere else on the planet. And the devotees who worked with Prabhupada on these legal documents, set up the India Bureau, they've all been interviewed, and they've all said that Prabhupada never imagined that the India Bureau would not be under the GBC. In fact, the only reason the legal documents were made a certain way was because otherwise it was just not possible to register in India. And so it was just a legal adjustment. There was never an intention. And yet the India Bureau basically is a renegade bureau. I mean, we just want to put the real name on things. It's a renegade bureau. There are people who have consistently refused to submit to Prabhupada's system. I know about 20 years ago, our age can't remember how many years ago it was, but there was a big drive on the GBC to get all the temples and zones in the world to put into the bylaws of their incorporation papers that what Prabhupada said, that ultimately there's GBC authority, so that you can't steal temples, you can't steal properties, you can't do what that traitor to Prabhupada did in Bangalore. And so there's only one country in the world that didn't cooperate, India, the India Bureau. And so they have usurped, because I'd like to let's just use real words. They have usurped power against Prabhupada's will. It's right there. Prabhupada did not say in the first clause of his will, the GBC is the ultimate managing authority for all of ISKCON except India, which shall be under separate authority as the India Bureau. Again, all the former leaders who actually worked with Prabhupada in that incorporation said Prabhupada never had the idea they were not under the GBC. And yet they have refused time and time again to do what every other national ISKCON body has done, and that is to accept Prabhupada's will, to accept Prabhupada's system. And the danger here is that not accepting the GBC destroyed the Gaudiya Math. And so I think these people are renegades. I think maybe they think they're doing the right thing. They're actually acting against ISKCON, against Prabhupada, and therefore to allow them a veto. They already have a veto power. They showed that, in the case of Lokanath Swami, and I'm not going to give my view on that. I don't want to, that's not the point, what I may think about. Because the fact is that in the Bhagavad Gita, in that famous verse, Apichet Suduracharo, that's the general principle. So obviously, Sadhureva Samantavya, a person who did something bad and then reformed and again is Krishna conscious, they should be considered a sadhu. Does that mean they can hold high office in a religious institution? Does it mean they should never again hold high office? That's obviously a detail. And in fact, we know from the Bhagavatam that pure devotees, Krishna's personal associates, strongly disagree on degrees of punishment. And we have the case of Bhima and Draupadi diametrically opposed to how should we punish Ashwatthama. Bhima and Draupadi, these are intimate associates of Krishna, and yet they strongly disagreed on degree of punishment. So therefore, in that case that I mentioned, we have the general principle from Krishna, but then, okay, if you consider someone a sadhu, does that mean they can hold high office in an ecclesiastical society? Does it mean they shouldn't hold high office? And I think to the, sort of the lack of understanding, so many people are talking as if it's a fundamental principle, which of course it's not.
So Maharaj, sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't want, but I just don't want to go, well, actually I do want to go on and on, but I know it's rude. So I guess my point here is that it's not, I think one of the real problems is that ISKCON has come to emphasize ritual over education. And everyone quotes, the famous verse of the Gita, Apiche Sudaracharo. It's like the national anthem of ISKCON. The beautiful verse that Krishna speaks. What no one ever quotes is the verse before that. Because the verse that Tadvidhi, the word tat, it's English, that. Just add an H and it's English. And it means the same thing in English and Sanskrit. So that you must know. So obviously the question is, well, what's that? And that is also explained in the previous verse. And basically what Krishna says in the previous verse is that serving me through knowledge, education, teaching is much better than rituals. It doesn't mean that we don't worship the deities. I'm not saying that. But basically, I think ISKCON has really gone off track. And I mean, not to the point of being illegitimate, not to the point that I'm going to abandon Prabhupada, or not to the point that I'm not going to try to fix things. But it's gone off base in for one thing, I think we're paying the price now for having a society that has placed, ritual high above education. We have, dozens and dozens, dozens, $1 billion or whatever it is, of big, beautiful temples. How many great schools do we have? In Europe, I don't know of one ISKCON school. There's the Avanti schools, but in terms of an ISKCON school, I don't know of one in all of Europe. I don't know of one in all of Latin America. So ISKCON has emphasized ritual over education. It has, I think, taken horrendous decisions in terms of how to present the movement in the Western world, confusing details such as dress and all these things with basic principles, and just sort of, and the result is now we have this political imbalance. And that's really, if you want to just talk in, just no nonsense terms, there is a great political imbalance in ISKCON. And by political, I don't just mean, incense smoke-filled rooms. I mean, by political, I mean the exercise of power. When you have a lot of people belonging to an institution, that generates power. And the West has become radically disempowered. India has been, the India Bureau has been basically usurped, has been taken over, ironically, by Western people who tell the Indians, this is colonialism, when in fact, they're the colonialists.
So Maharaj, just to return for a moment to the theme of GBC authority, you mentioned that there are things that might have gone on that Prabhupada wouldn't have tolerated, and there are times he did suspend the GBC, reverse their decisions. You mentioned in your broadcast the other day that in the mid-80s, the Guru Reform movement did successfully challenge the GBC, and reform was able to be enacted.
Yes.
Exactly what is the check and balance mechanism? I will cite some other examples.
Good point. I mean, when the Guru system was changed, I was kind of the ringleader for the change. It was at New Vrindavan in 1985 when ISKCON came very close to splitting, very, very close. And I gave this impassioned speech at a private closed-door GBC meeting, and then they changed the system. I'm not giving myself all the credit, but I just, I kind of really got angry about it. And there were GBCs who were saying, well, first meet the Constitution, which, as we now know, took another 40 years. So yes, it was the fact that devotees were demanding change, but they weren't traitors to ISKCON. They weren't, to me, and the term I use, if you take a knife to Prabhupada's body, I have no use for you. To me, you've crossed all the red lines. And so Prabhupada said, ISKCON is his body. And if you're threatening to cut Prabhupada's body, I have no respect for you.
Taking inspiration from the Guru Reform movement,
yes,
albeit the movement was only 16, the GBC was only 16 years old when that challenge came, 15, 16, 40 years have passed since, as you mentioned. A few of us did put a letter together. It had 50 signatories, including Sabha members, essentially saying to the GBC, this might have been a couple of years ago, in light of some problematic decisions, and we mentioned keeping on a child abuser as a guru, we mentioned the acquiescence at that time to the Bureau, not only on that issue, but also on the Vaishnavi Diksha Guru issue. I think it was also just in the immediate wake of the BVP scandal breaking out and the fact that there'd been 8 ignored investigations. And now all of a sudden, 40 years later, we're scrambling. Oh, we didn't know the guy. We never, all that. We simply said, at least subject yourself to some form of a review. And not only was it routinely ignored or even scoffed out of existence, there was exploratory conversations about recrimination, and many Sabha members were told that Sabha might even get disbanded because they'd signed this thing, even though they're an advisory body. So I've no doubt that we could have gone about that a little differently, but I'm still curious. How could you bring about principle-centered change? If the GBC simply decides, we're going to ignore you, and they've got managerial ultimate authority as their get-out-of-jail-free clause, by what mechanism do we now help to broach that there's an issue and that we
I think
are mildly concerned or
by the mechanism which historically has worked in the past? It worked. And the 2 examples I've given where, and I was on the GBC, but the 2 examples I've given where the GBC could not act for whatever reason, didn't act, and there was so much pressure brought by the devotees that they had to act. One was the changing the guru system, and that changed in 1985. I mean, it went to the other extreme. As I sometimes joke, it became easier to become an ISKCON guru than to get a driver's license. So that was, but it was pressure. It was pressure from devotees. And the second case was when some very senior, most senior disciples of Prabhupada were going and sitting at the feet of Narayan Maharaj, who was like in that, what is it, Vishwarupa ceremony in Krishna Balaram temple, and where he just blatantly was speaking, wrong philosophy, which is another topic. And he sort of presented himself as the self-effulgent new Acharya of ISKCON. And there were these very senior, about 3 or 4 very senior leaders in ISKCON that were going to him, sitting at his feet, and there was a huge revolt against that, outrage among the temple presidents and other sannyasis, and it forced the GBC to take action. So we have precedent, because you don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I mean, if Prabhupada's system is being threatened on one end, the solution is not to kill it on the other end. And so it takes someone who's not so affected by the mode of passion to, just do what has to be done without causing another kind of crisis.
So our shortcoming was that we just weren't senior enough? Because we had Sabha members.
No, it wasn't a shortcoming, because if you look at history, if you look at those 2 examples I gave, the sort of the zonal acharya system, which is a whole other topic. I mean, I have a lot to say on that, but this is not the time. And I think generally it's there's sort of a caricature of what it was. And anyway, I won't go into it now. And then the one which is very clear, where we had to stop very senior ISKCON leaders, GBC members, from going to Narayan and sort of empowering him to have more and more influence in ISKCON. So if you look at the sort of the uproar that caused, let's take that case with Narayan Maharaj. If you look at the uproar, if you look at how widespread it was, the fact that the Sabha, let's say, presented a determination where now there's more and more, I would say it's just now beginning to approach the level of pressure it took to affect change in that case. And so I don't think it's failing. I look at it the other way. I think that this is probably the most united the Western Hare Krishna movement has been in ages. And it's, I mean, many letters were written to the GBC from very senior people and groups of people. And so I don't think the effort is failing. I think that you just have to keep applying pressure until they understand the cost of what they're doing. And so it's there's something so comical, tragically comical, because the GBC, they thought the compromise was okay in North America, for example, or in UK or wherever, the governing RGB or whatever can decide. And so in the name of not being imposed upon by, the liberals like us, they're actually demanding the right to control the Western world out of India, that the India Bureau should control the Western world. So these people, I mean, I probably, my mother used to say, if you can't say something nice about somebody, don't say anything. Because, if I say what I really think of these people, it'd probably be too much to say here. But so I think that, yeah, it's not failing. It's not a lost cause. And I think we just need patience. And like, for example, I just attended a meeting today for Latin America. There are many very intelligent devotees in Latin America who are disgusted with the GBC decision, who are sort of, getting together more and more. And so I think it's just a question of doing what has worked in the past, a sustained, growing effort to make clear to the GBC that this cannot be. We are.
You saw Srila Prabhupada. Oh, apologies.
No, I was going to say that, and I think it's very important that we not be traitors like some of these people and threaten, take a knife to Prabhupada's body. But I think that we have to make it very clear, and it is actually the North American leaders now are becoming very militant about this. The RGB, that make it very clear that this is not acceptable.
You had a front row seat to witness Prabhupada establishing the GBC and how he engaged with it in the 7 years or whatever between its formation and his passing. Ultimate managerial authority. I believe those words are taken from the will. They might not have actually even been Srila Prabhupada's personal choice of phrasing. I'm not sure. But of course,
he signed
it. Attached absolute meaning to it, as we always do.
Well, yeah, Prabhupada signed it.
Right. No, he signed it, and therefore that's assent, that's agreement, and so on. But what are we to make of it if we unpack this rather than just take it as some kind of dogmatic axiom? What does Prabhupada actually mean? Does it mean that they're not accountable to anybody else, that they are a law unto themselves? Does it mean that they are simply the final decision-making body? They can't pass responsibility? What's the intended understanding here?
I think that Prabhupada expected the GBC to be rational. And sometimes they fail to be so. So because there are letters from Prabhupada or statements, recorded statements of Prabhupada, where he'll say, for example, the GBC should meet with the other senior devotees and decide these things. So I think we have strong evidence. In fact, I wrote a paper, I don't know if you've seen it. It's like a 60-page paper on constitutionalism in ISKCON. And I remember one of the things I quoted from Prabhupada is that he said, I think more than once, that the GBC should govern in consultation with other senior devotees. And so if the GBC fails to consult with or to take seriously important devotees, senior devotees, or just whoever knows what they're talking about, then they're not really following Prabhupada. And you see, there's something at stake. I think the problem is that there's a certain arrogance, I believe, the idea that, well, it's just an Indian movement now. And there's some truth in that. Like if you, like as a sort of like a sociologist, historian, when the GBC resolutions come out, what I usually go to first, well, a couple of things. What are the zonal secretaries, but especially, who are the new candidates for sannyas and guru, and who are the people actually being, accepted? Who are the new sannyasis and gurus? Because that's your crystal ball right there. That tells you what the future of ISKCON is. And so I think almost like unbelievably bad judgment about how to present the Hare Krishna movement in the Western world. I mean, almost like unfathomable of this fanatical thing of trying to impose Hindu Muslim ethnicity on the Western world has weakened. So, but I think the Western movement is strong enough. It's more united than ever than I've seen it in decades. And I think, yes.
Well, and you made the point earlier that there could be a difference between legitimacy and competence. And if I think about secular management teams that I've worked with over the years, they always have goals and they are held accountable as to whether or not they achieve those goals. There is competency assessment, there is succession planning. We might just have a grace and favors kind of thing that isn't particularly results oriented. And I don't think we have accountability. Did you read? I think I might have sent you my Q&A with ChatGPT about what might Prabhupada have meant with this ultimate managing authority. Did you happen to see that?
I don't remember getting that, but
Okay, I'll quickly display now, and we can cherry pick if we think there's some.
So now we have the new Acharya, ChatGPT.
Oh, okay, hang on, just give me a second. I've got to find the slides and PDFs. No, I don't want to do that. I want to share screen. Sorry, I've just got to find the right way to share this. Okay, here we go. So this was my question. GBC often cites Prabhupada's statement, ultimate managerial authority. They seem, so this is me editorializing, they seem to take this to mean not answerable to anyone. So you can challenge me on that if you like. They might assume their authority to be absolute. Given Prabhupada's teachings, is it likely he would have wished the GBC to see itself conduct itself as being unaccountable to others? What are the risks of such an interpretation? What does public accountability look like? How else might the statement be understood? Now, obviously, ChatGPT is not some Vedic Praman, but I just thought it did tee up some interesting considerations. So 4 parts: what might he have meant? Does he intend them to be accountable? The risk of an absolutist interpretation.
Final coordinating authority for institutional, not ultimate moral, spiritual, or epistemic. No, it's ChatGPT is hallucinating again, as it often does.
This is put too much emphasis on managerial, you think, in terms
of
that?
Because, for example, because you see in that paper I wrote, I included quotes where someone asked Prabhupada, what about philosophical things? And Prabhupada said the GBC is there. So I think it's, I think that's not the road we want to go down, where we separate spiritual things from managerial, because for Prabhupada, they were the same. I think rather, I mean, just if you look at what Prabhupada said, he did expect the GBC to be consulting with and discussing with other senior devotees. That was his vision, that the GBC, in other words, to be the ultimate managing authority does not mean, like the Prabhupada was asked, for example, by someone, what about philosophy? What about like maintaining philosophical orthodoxy? And Prabhupada said something like, well, the GBC is there. But they can make mistakes. They can make blunders. And so Prabhupada saw this body of senior devotees as that the GBC needs to consult with them, needs to take them seriously.
And of course, I agree with you. The epistemological and spiritual or whatever is certainly not out of scope. I thought there were some interesting other points here. GBC was conceived as a collective managerial body to prevent power from collapsing to individual gurus, temple presidents as feudal lords or self-authorizing elites. About accountability. So this was ChatGBC's basic. Accountability, humility, subordination are higher principles for those in leadership. Authority is always conditional, delegated, not inherent, functional, not ontological. Leaders are servants.
Well, that one, functional, not ontological, delegated, not inherent, revocable if misused. It's, you see, it's, obviously, imagine a scenario where the GBC really went rogue. Imagine a scenario where the people in the GBC were like the India Bureau, or at least like the leaders of the India Bureau, and just decided that, as has happened in history in other religious societies, and what if the GBC really deviated? There's no question that Prabhupada would want us to just, take over and put it back on track, and then constitute a loyal, intelligent GBC. Now, it's not at that point. It's not at that point. The GBC, they're not geniuses, definitely, but they haven't gone rogue. They're not just, I think they've just taken a bad decision. And I think they may even have good intentions, but anyway.
And I guess it might be subjective when it is a catastrophically bad decision. I think you described earlier that you think it was a very detrimental decision, the holding back of Vaishnavis from initiating to stymie the movement in the West, could even have a catastrophic impact.
Well, in fact, I'm kind of batting around the concept of civil disobedience, and it's something which others are also. In other words, there's a type of civil disobedience where you do not accept, how should I put it? You don't question the general, quiet. You don't question the general legitimacy of a government, but on some particular issue, you feel they're so far off base that simultaneously you accept the government as basically legitimate. You're not trying to replace it or kill the people. However, there's a particular law or a particular decision which is so harmful to society that it should not be obeyed. And so that's sort of like a selective type of civil disobedience.
And I get the sense from you, you think some level of intervention is possibly imminent, or at least we're on that trajectory at the moment.
Yeah, I think the decision is so inappropriate, and in a sense, I think the GBC, I would guess, based on my experience, they've been caught a bit by surprise themselves, because there's been nothing like this literally in 40 years. The last time, maybe actually with the case where senior people going to Narayan, maybe 30 years, but it's been a whole generation, maybe more than a generation, since anything like this happened. But there is precedent. ISKCON, in a sense, was saved by temple presidents, sannyasis, non-GBC sannyasis, just senior devotees. Even people might not have had a title, but they were just senior people, and they really saved ISKCON from the threat of this person who, taught a philosophy in many ways very different from Prabhupada. And so, but that movement against, demanding that these very senior people not come under the influence of that sannyasi, there was no hint, there was no question of, we don't accept the GBC anymore. You're illegitimate. We're going to form our own GBC. There was nothing like that. It was a group of loyal devotees, and that was their power in a sense. They were loyal Prabhupada devotees who accepted ISKCON as not belonging to the GBC, but belonging to Prabhupada. And they just said, but we're not going to stand for this. This cannot be. You cannot do this. And it became so widespread that the GBC was forced to do what they should have done voluntarily and didn't, and what they should have done voluntarily in this case and are not doing, and that is take seriously many senior devotees who, unlike the India Bureau, don't make, transparent threats, don't take a knife to Prabhupada's body, but instead are actually loyal devotees who are simply saying, you can't do this. We accept the GBC. We know that's Prabhupada's system. Even if the present GBC, they're not geniuses. But the point is that's Prabhupada's system. However, on this particular point, this decision to continue to block women from serving, for one thing, Krishna says twice in the Gita that it's very dangerous not to do your duty born of your own nature. So in the name of protecting women, stopping women from using their full potential is actually threatening women, putting them in spiritual danger. And so, and also it basically is a death warrant for the Western Hare Krishna movement.
Yes, it's very brave.
Yeah. And if the Western Hare Krishna movement continues to fail and is not somehow, there's not a renaissance, Prabhupada's global vision fails. Everything is at stake here. And therefore, because this decision is an existential threat to Prabhupada's global strategy, therefore, it must be adjusted. And the power of the resistance, if you want to call it that, la résistance, the power of the resistance is precisely, as it was in the past, that it's coming from loyal ISKCON devotees. A resistance coming from people who betray Prabhupada by abandoning ISKCON to people who are not making the right decisions. The last thing in the world Prabhupada would want, if you think they're really making bad decisions, is to turn over his body to these people.
Yeah, and I just thought, let's transition in a moment to the child protection part of our conversation. Okay. But I just thought it was worth having a look at, what ChatGPT considered the risks. We've got here about credible avenue for redress, which I think is what you're talking about. I am worried that the reality is it's harder than it should be to raise concerns or express dissent. I think it's mostly ignored.
I'm not sure. I think we just have to stick to it. The time, the amount of time that has elapsed between this unfortunate decision and now is actually much less time than it took in the other cases to change ISKCON from below, not from the GBC. So in that sense, I think we're on track.
Now, Maharaj, you have used death warrant, I think was your language. For some reason, I can't find our screen that has us both on. Oh, that's why it's right here. You mentioned death warrant, and that, the treatment of women and the current position on women initiating is so at odds with not only Lord Chaitanya's instructions, but community sentiment out in the world, that it's practically a death blow. I would say a rivaling issue would be our history of failings in child protection. I'm curious, before we get into it more explicitly, as a strategic issue for an organization wishing to take root around the world,
right?
How big a deal is getting it right for the next generation?
The child protection?
Well, I was deliberate in my words, getting it right. So that to me would suggest we're bringing them into a loving environment. We're certainly keeping them safe and free from abuse. We're offering them a great education and start in life.
Yeah, I would say that I don't think I care less about children than people that have different views than me on this topic, who are, have more radical views. That's why I think in my zone, of all the major gurukulas, it probably had the lowest. I was very serious about these things. One time when I was GBC in Brazil, and we had a big school there, and someone came and told me that one of the leaders of the gurukul we had on our farm was giving sort of weird punishments to the children. It wasn't even sexual. Like we have a river, a mountain river with all these, big rocks, and they had to sit on their knees for hours in the river. And so, I mean, when I heard that, it was told to me, and because I didn't live in Brazil, but I was staying there for a few months in the farm. And from the time I heard it, literally within about 10 to 15 minutes, that person was removed from the school. It took about 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you
And
for what you've done in that regard, Maharaj.
I mean, rather than put unqualified people in the school, I actually caused, I upset a lot of the people working under me, the leaders, because I took the very best devotees in the country and put them in charge of the school.
If you were rating, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that at the same time, and now just speaking sort of as a historian, not as someone who's taking a stand on anything related to child abuse, but it seems to me, compared to other religions, just compared to humanity in general, that in the last few decades, that child abuse in Western schools is not a major issue. In fact, all the cases I know of, and there must be things I don't know of, but the cases I've heard of are almost all in India.
So you're talking about within ISKCON today?
Yeah. So okay. In other words, for the last at least 20 years, maybe longer, child abuse is not, like the scourge of ISKCON in North America or South America, or as far as I know, in Europe.
So undoubtedly, and presumably it was the closing of the boarding schools that was the biggest factor here. And parents are now a little bit wiser than they were. There was a bit of naivety and
very much
willing to entrust their kids to others' care in the early days, which we've learned the hard way is not wise. If you were looking at the movement's scorecard regarding successfully launching children into the world as devotees, but as fully equipped, 10 being we are acing this, minus 10 being it couldn't be more disastrous. Right. What would your rating roughly be? It might vary from place to place, of course.
Well, I actually have always liked kids. And so I have a lot of very, very good relationships. I mean, I've put a lot of guru coolies through college, which I don't just advertise publicly. And I talk to a lot of them because I just always liked young people. And so in Alachua, it is the most decentralized ISKCON community probably on earth. And, and it's overwhelming majority Western. And there are devotee dentists and lawyers and pharmacists. And, there are many successful guru coolies, airline pilots, commercial airline pilots. And so I don't, and like, for example, there's what they call a charter school in North America. And it was voted one of the best schools in the state of Florida. And they have two schools, and the other school, which is more traditional Gurukula, or, they have, PhD professors, devotees. And so that's what I also know the Dallas school, because that's led by an excellent devotee. I should mention, I know she probably wouldn't want me to, but Nritya Kishori, disciple of Tamal Krishna Goswami, who's an excellent devotee. And I've never heard a hint of anything like that in their school. Dallas has a relatively big Gurukula. Almost all of the students go on to the university. And so I think that, I don't want to speak for Europe, but I think I know something about North America. And I think there's a lot of the criticism, I think, is sort of really behind the times. And it's almost like there's no amount of progress you can make that will change the narrative that our schools haven't learned and so on. I'm trying to think if I know of any other schools. I think it's gone to the other extreme almost, because I gave a talk at a devotee high school in the West. I won't mention where, and there were maybe like 18 or 20 teenagers, different ages, And I was, being myself, doing my thing about we have to spread this movement and all that. And I found out, kind of to my shock, that there wasn't one teenage devotee in the school that had ever even heard, that Lord Chaitanya's movement was meant to, really help the world, change the world. They'd never heard that. They're like, a lot of them born in the movement. No one ever told them that. So I think that a lot of the general impressions about how kids are treated, I mean, Alachua, which has like 2,000 devotees, and it has 2 very good schools, and I mean, fanaticism, I mean, anything but. I mean, and no one could call it a fanatical thing, and there's a lot of very successful gurukulis in many walks of life.
And I would agree that children born in the movement today are much more likely to be greeted in a loving family, as opposed to have a whole bunch of guilt trips put on them about their level of practice from the beginning of their lives. They are likely to get a better quality education and be able to make their way in the world better. It could be that we've swung the pendulum so far we now practically don't expose them to the teachings of Krishna consciousness and only give them the academics. So I agree with that. You made a point earlier about India maybe not following the same trend. And of course, the GBC have afforded India their own independent CPO. So it's got the worst history, largely because of the Mayapur and Vrindavan Gurukulas and everything that took place over decades with those 2 schools. But it has the least amount of international oversight. Again, this seems to be just, the Bureau can play this card anytime it likes, anytime it wants.
In fact, I remember several years ago, I can't remember, maybe 8 or 9 years, I just don't remember anymore. There were some devotees, GBC members, who were determined to stop the corruption in Mayapur. And they went there, and they were literally almost thrown off buildings. They were almost killed. And so, Mayapur is kind of like sui generis, it's in its own category. And obviously, and of course, there are many nice devotees in Mayapur, and the TOVP is there. But there was an attempt, a determined attempt, to stop the corruption in Mayapur, and the GBCs who tried to do that were almost killed, literally.
Yeah, I recall. So I asked you about what number you'd give. We didn't get a number, but what I think I heard is you reckon that in the Western world, outcomes are a whole bunch better for young people and children in terms of safety and the quality of academic education, and doing well in the world, thriving. India remains possibly not as up to speed, and it is a worrying exception that's been made. How would you grade the governance by the GBC of child protection matters, or even just the strategy for young people? So again, 10 being couldn't be done better. We are world class. People are learning by looking at how we do these things. -10 couldn't be worse.
Well, God, I don't want to. I wish I knew more, because I've been a little reclusive in the last many years for various reasons, and so I don't want to speak on a topic where I'm really not well informed. At least, I do know something about the Alachua schools, those 2 Alachua schools. I know something about Dallas. So those 3 schools, which are the main schools in North America.
The question's about the leadership, the governance by the international GBC of child protection matters, of young people matters.
Yeah, I think but again, if we're going to blame them when things go really haywire, then if there are good schools in North America, then it seems to be fair. They have to get some credit. And so at least in North America and in South America, they just don't have schools, which is, I think that alone, if we're going to really, I think where the GBC has really failed, and failed badly, is in their responsibility to closely oversee a region of the world where there are literally thousands of devotees and many, many good devotees, and yet there's not a single school. So, you can have the abuse, which you mentioned, of kind of, forcing children into unnatural and dangerous situations. But I think not providing education is another form of, serious malfeasance. And
so yeah, I didn't hear a rating, but I'm assuming that you're saying there's a bit of a range, that there are some schools that are doing well, and the GBC deserves some credit for that.
Although they actually aren't places with a GB, there hardly is a GBC. But anyway, so as far as giving a number, I have opinions about how the movement is generally managed in Europe, and what I consider to be it's like, for example, there was a Bhaktivedanta college which closed. Now they have some kind of program going on, which, I think it's just a distance learning MBA or something like that. But my experience is that the GBC in Europe have, I have a disciple, an excellent lady, a disciple who is, they made the Minister of Education for Southern Europe. And I know she is a very good devotee. She has 2 children of her own. And she would absolutely never tolerate anything remotely like, mistreatment of children. And so in terms of her role, I don't know if she really has any schools to oversee. So there's so little, there's really, I would say that overwhelmingly, care of children in ISKCON in the West is very much done privately within the family. I think that ISKCON, I do read things like in ISKCON News, and there are programs like there's a bus tour or whatever, but in terms of really, I think GBCs have very, very little influence and much less control over the lives of young people. Because when you have a congregational movement, the GBC, they don't make decisions about children anymore.
You had a front row seat again to how Srila Prabhupada dealt with children, how he spoke about children, maybe what he wanted for the Gurukul and so on. What, in your view, would be the absolute expectations Prabhupada would have about provisions we make as a movement for our next generation, for their education, for their safety, etc.?
Yeah, I can tell you exactly what Prabhupada said about that, because I heard him say it many times. In those days, almost all the children were very young. There was, I think Ekendra, Rupanuga's son, was like the only kid in ISKCON that wasn't just a, real little kid. And so a typical scene, whether in Mayapur or Los Angeles, during Guru Puja, they were almost all like babes in arms. The mothers would come. And so there just weren't older kids. But several times I was with Prabhupada when mothers or both parents brought their child in to get blessed by Prabhupada. And Prabhupada always said the same thing. He would say, take care of them very nicely. They are the future hope. And so I think Prabhupada wanted us to lavish attention on them and to just, according to the best science, according to the best understanding of, of just education and child raising. I think Prabhupada wanted us to really, he said they're the future hope.
We've had a child protection function since 1998. I believe we saw it as necessary once that big case in the US kind of blew up, and we thought, well, let's make sure we've got a mechanism for looking into cases, keeping children safe, and so on. What, in your view, would constitute a real best-in-class child protection function for the society? What are some of the elements that absolutely need to be a part of that?
Okay, the first thing I would say is that the leaders of ISKCON, following Prabhupada's example, should love the children. In other words, if you actually love them, if you see them as Prabhupada did, then, let me give you one Prabhupada story about how important it is, because it actually applies to the children. I was sitting with Prabhupada in New Vrindavan outside. He was getting his massage. Prabhupada, whenever possible, he would take his daily massage outside under the sun. He really liked that. And so Pushta Krishna, it's actually, and you remember Pushta Krishna?
I don't think I ever met him, but that's all right.
He was kind of like this big, strong guy, and he was massaging Prabhupada's head. Prabhupada was complaining like it wasn't hard enough. He said, not like cotton swabs. And then, and then he said, this is big, strong American guy. He said, well, if you're not strong enough, call someone else, because he really wanted you. But anyway, that's not the point here. So I was sitting out with Prabhupada. He's getting his massage in New Vrindavan in the house I was staying out with him. And there were these two little kittens just sort of roaming around, two little kittens. And they sort of, they're playing. They grabbed each other in such a way that they sort of formed this perfect little ball. It's like little kittens. And they rolled down this little thing, and they actually rolled right under Prabhupada's lap. And of course, I was sitting next to Prabhupada. And so, in those days, we were so, we were so young and we didn't know it. So I was saying, ooh, an animal touching Prabhupada. So, because that's the way we were then. But then Prabhupada, to my surprise, he just started petting the kittens. And then Prabhupada looked at us and said, because the kittens were so carefree, they just totally trusted Prabhupada. And so then Prabhupada looked at us and said, if I put my head in your lap and you cut my throat, that is the greatest sin. And so these children, they're helpless. They're completely under. And so I think it's, I don't want to just be evasive. I don't think I am being evasive, but I'm trying to look at not just the symptom, but where is this really coming from?
And the observation, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, thank you. I'm just, so I think that, it's interesting that there's a verse in the Bhagavatam, which I think is very important. I can find out what number it is really quickly if you want to know. Archayam eva haraye pujang jakshadhaye hate, etc. Nattad bhakteshu chanyeshu. Let me see if I can get that for you real quick. It's 11:247.
Mm-hmm.
And what the verse says, literally, very literal translation, that one who, with faith, endeavors to worship the Lord only in the deity form. Of course, and that's the Kanishta, only in the deity form. Nattad bhakteshu, and you don't worship Krishna in the hearts of the devotees. And you don't worship Krishna in the hearts of other living beings. And the Bhagavatam says, and it's very explicit in Sanskrit, Sabhakta Prakrita Smrita, that devotee is on the material platform.
So we've got love as a key ingredient.
If I could just sort of, close out this point I'm making, I think that when you have a movement where the heart of the movement is really caring about other people, and really caring about educating other people. And if you care about other people, obviously your first concern is going to be with these beautiful, helpless children. And it's the very definition of the third-class devotee, that the person wants to build a temple, wants to do elaborate puja, but doesn't care that much about other people. And once, if you really care about other people, obviously children are going to be your first concern. And so, you can institute, of course, all kinds of rules, and we should do that. But is this a movement in Europe, in other places, South America, where we treasure our children, we cherish our children? I was once with, Prabhupada wrote one time, a lady disciple wrote to Prabhupada and said that, this famous letter, and said that, she has a child, but she really wants to do deity worship. And Prabhupada said, child worship is higher than deity worship. I was with Prabhupada in LA in 1970, early 1970. And there was one of his disciples, a young lady, everyone was young then, but a lady, and he was really, being very heavy with her, because from his room through a window, he saw that a child had run out into the street. And Prabhupada was really upset about that. He wasn't just the icon, he was like a real person. He was very upset. And when the mother tried to give some excuse, Prabhupada was having none of it. He was very upset because her child ran in the street. And Prabhupada said, take care of them, they're the future hope. I mean, Prabhupada loved the children. And so if you love them, if ISKCON as a society if we love our children, then we will do everything. Just everything. We will move heaven and earth to give them a good life. And when you have a movement that just mostly wants to build big temples and do rituals and doesn't care about people in general, like, ISKCON is not really that concerned about the fact that Prabhupada's global strategy is failing, is collapsing. It was all based on having a powerful presence in America and especially in Western Europe. So if you really care about people, then obviously our own children will have pride of place.
And love is probably psychologically the most important ingredient in a child's upbringing, because it gives them a sense of self-worth and a sense of belonging and those essential things from which they can grow and learn and thrive. It could be argued, to go full circle, that if we had more representation of men and women, and not just sannyasis who are supposedly socially dead and possibly wanting children and women out of their consciousness, that we might actually have different settings. But beyond love.
No, but I strongly agree with that. I strongly agree with that. I think men are not by nature, the people that care for children. And I think if we had qualified women, and there are qualified women, I think there are many evils that are coming from this sexism, this bodily concept of life.
So beyond love, which I agree is a collective responsibility, and to some extent, obviously can't exactly be legislated, it's a matter of our collective consciousness. What practical things would we want as vital components of a world-class child protection service, child protection function?
I would just say go with the best science.
So we should research it and see what others have done.
Well, that's what civilized people do. I mean, there are people that dedicate their lives to childcare, and they study it and they know all the statistics. This works, that doesn't work. You absolutely have to do this. You absolutely shouldn't do that. And so, I mean, that was a mood that Prabhupada created, which is not really there as far as, so much. And that is when I joined in 1969, it's almost like that song from that famous musical, Annie, Get Your Gun. I can do anything better than you. Whatever you can do, I can do. And so we kind of had that mood that we are serving Krishna and they're serving, Maya. And so we have to do everything the best. We have to be the best cooks, the best seamstresses. We have to be, the best speakers because we're serving the greatest master. And so I think ISKCON should be famous, not for harassing people in airports, which that fame is kind of dying hard. But I think we should be famous as educators, not just as ritualists or people that, dance in funny clothes in the street. I think we really need to be famous because Prabhupada said we have to put a head on the society, a headless society. And that means the Brahman, metaphor that the body of the Virat Rupa is, or the body of society represents the four Varnas, that's in the Rig Veda. That goes back to the oldest Vedic literature. It's in the 10th book of the Rig Veda. And when people I think in the UK, when people, certainly in North America or Germany, when they think of Hare Krishna, the first thing that pops in their mind is not, oh, great educators. So I mean, if we had good school, and again, I think there's exhaustive science on this subject: child raising, having good schools, and I think, ironically, if we had great schools, we'd probably make thousands of devotees, because the world is so crazy now that if you know that, okay, the Hare Krishnas are nice, they have all these nice qualities, and my child will be protected, we should be not only up to standard in childcare, we should be the pace setters.
And I agree with you, Maharaj, that in many places in the world now, our schools are coming into line with national curricula. Yes, we might be able to do better jobs of educating teachers and making our pedagogy first class and world class and so on.
Not just pedagogy. I'm thinking just of, giving the child, real appropriate affection, because we know their souls. We know they're great souls. So go ahead.
Well, on child protection, arguably, we had in the ICPO two extremely qualified by worldly standards. They were both master's degrees certified, and their processes and procedures were vetted and approved by global experts. We got rid of them. Now, I understand that you had some concerns, and I do want to make sure
it's not just some concerns. I mean, if you, I could. There's a long list of cases where they were practically abusive towards adults, and it was really out of hand. I mean, the irregularities, the injustice of the handling in some cases was just outrageous. And I personally studied it. And frankly, as far as I know, I think it's a long stretch to say, I offered to talk to these people. They refused to talk to me, the husband and wife, and years ago. And no, there's a long list of stories which are egregious and really bad about ruining the lives of people without due process. And getting a master's degree is hardly, it's not the gold standard to say these people were expert at childcare. I think probably they did care about children, but there was a famous quote heard by two very senior devotees where this person said that I would rather something like convict, thousands of innocent people, rather than let one guilty person go. So, there were, which totally flips universal principles of justice. It's like, frankly, because in a system of justice, the same person cannot be the prosecutor and the judge. And that's what happened. The same person was the prosecutor and the judge, had virtually no understanding of actual fair process. And it became like a vigilante committee.
And you arrived at these conclusions based on your first-hand investigations, or hearsay?
I compiled, probably like over 100 pages of evidence and testimony from some of the most respected devotees in ISKCON, people whose character is beyond question. Eyewitness accounts. Like really very, very serious, respected devotees who suppression of evidence, where one person, like in this case, this person, again, I'm not claiming to know who's guilty or innocent. I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say I know. I don't know. I do know that when the alleged abuse took place, there was a very senior devotee, one of the actually one of the most respected Vaishnavis in ISKCON, certainly in North America, who said, I was in the room. I was in the room and it didn't happen. And that person was not allowed to testify. And then people who said, well, no, it didn't really happen. They were coached and sort of, no, you have to say it did happen. So it was just, it was egregious. It wasn't marginal. It wasn't a gray area.
But again, you weren't a first-hand witness. This is what you're relaying, having been told.
However, what I'm talking about, I'm not saying who's innocent or guilty. I'm talking about fair process. The same person was the prosecutor and the judge and said he would much rather convict and destroy the lives of innocent people, rather than, don't take chances. So, and then because I produced a ton of evidence of this stuff, not a little bit. And this wasn't the only case, the other cases of people's lives being ruined. And so then the GBC actually voted, ironically, the same person as chairman now was chairman then. The GBC voted that the CPO director should simply turn over all the records of the proceedings so that, so the GBC would act sort of like an appeal court. And this person refused to turn it over, flagrantly rejected the GBC order, refused to turn it over, refused to allow an impartial investigation. And so
naturally, we obviously want to offer the right to reply to these points that you're making.
Right.
I do actually have Gandharvika available, so she can either join us now or they can comment afterwards. I've got a bunch. You might see this as well, Maharaj. There's a bunch of questions that are.
Okay, I'll take a look. I just want to say that everything I'm telling you now, I'm only telling you things that are not rumors, that are not hearsay, things that I took the time and effort to very carefully verify from devotees in ISKCON who to this day are highly respected for their character, for their veracity. They can say whatever they like, and I'm not but I did, and other people also. We did an impartial investigation. I did not suppress any evidence, and that's what I found. And I do know for a fact, because I kept asking the GBC chairman, did you get the records of the trial? And it turned out that this person didn't send it. So they can say whatever they want. I know that I did my research. I did it carefully. I know that I wasn't biased. I was open to the truth wherever it led me. And that's what I also know for a fact that I was, vilified. I was accused of horrible things on, in all these chat groups and everything. I know that for a fact. I was accused of being, all kinds of horrible things because I said, we need a fair trial according to universal principles of due process, and whatever is decided. I never said one time in my life that person was innocent. I never said the person was guilty. I just said, and the CPO totally stonewalled the very idea of having an impartial group of qualified people look at all the evidence. They never agreed to that. So
what's your preference, Maharaj? We've got a few options here. One is we could invite Gandharvika to join us and discuss now, or we could respond to the questions and comments in the chat, or we could invite Gandharvika and Kamlesh to respond afterwards and you could respond to that. What's your preference?
Okay, let me just check. Let me look at the chat real quick. How do I click on the chat?
Is it in the right-hand ribbon? It says comments, and there should be a little, maybe you can't see them. I can bring them up if you can't see them.
Let me see. The full.
I'm mindful we've got a couple of other things I'd like to explore your view.
Yeah, actually, and I haven't got as much time as I'd like, so maybe we'll just go to the other things. But
and we can come to the questions at the end, seeing how we go with time. But obviously, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to not offer Gandharvika Kamlesh.
Well, if you do that, if you do want to do that, I've got other people like Brahmatirtha.
Yeah, no, for sure. And we could even have it as a separate discussion.
Yeah, because I mean, he was intimately involved in these things. One thing I know for a fact is that I won't mention their names. I already have mentioned some of the names. I was, just insulted, and just called this and called that, accused of someone who was facilitating child abuse because I said I wanted a fair trial. I know a vigilante when I see one.
And as we're saying, I mean, obviously we've given you the opportunity to present your take on things, and getting to the truth of the matter, that might involve at least asking Gandharvika and Kamlesh what they say in response to the things that you've said. Yeah, I think it would be potentially beneficial.
No, they can deny everything they want. I mean, again, I still have, as far as I know, unless my computer ate it. But, I took a month or two to do research. And actually the people I talked to were so, what's the word? Reluctant to even get involved that, they were afraid that I would, mention their name. Please don't mention my name. But I know who they are. I know very well who they are. And they're most respectable people, devotees in ISKCON.
And I think it would be helpful,
yes,
to clear the air and get to ground truth on those matters. Because what we've obviously done in the meantime is sack that ICPO, put something new in place. And certainly, and this is where it's unfortunate, I don't think you've seen the Satna case files yet or anything.
Yes.
Arguably, it's gone seriously backwards, like scarily backwards.
I think that's a bit, with all due respect. I mean,
you haven't seen the.
That case is, as far as I know, Brahmatirtha knows more about that. And I'm not saying that she was treated fairly. I'm not saying that she was given justice. I'm not saying that. All I would say about that case is that, I would have to, since it's too overwhelming for me, I would have to have someone who I consider to be completely neutral and someone who has some expertise in judicial things to read all the evidence and then give me an expert opinion on that.
And I'm happy to send you, obviously, I think I've already sent you Satna's interview and the key questions that we think it raises.
Right.
I'm happy to send those questions again because...
Yeah, in that case, you may notice that I have no opinion on that case. I mean, I don't disbelieve her.
No, I'm hearing that.
Yeah, and I don't, and because I am ignorant, I mean, I know what she told me, and I'm certainly not going to say that that's not what happened. But again, I would have to, there would have to be, I don't think it's, and I don't mean this in any way to, I'm not trying to cast doubt on her testimony or say that's not what really happened. That's not what I'm doing. I will say, though, that I would have to not only hear from her, if I was going to be fair, I would have to hear from her, and I would have to take the time or talk to someone who did take the time to thoroughly investigate why it was whatever dismissed in court and what the other side says. And it could certainly turn out that everything she says is the truth. I'm not saying it's not the truth. I'm only saying, though, I think it's not wise to form a strong view on things if someone has not taken the time to thoroughly investigate both sides, to hear from all the parties. And I think to form a strong opinion before doing that is unwise.
Well, and we certainly sent our list of questions to the Minister of Justice, to the GBC-EC, and to CPOC. So,
good luck.
Obviously, they may. Well, the fact that you're even saying that is is indicative of something, right? That in fact
Absolutely.
we probably won't get a response,
Yeah,
and
ISKCON is
therefore
not.
there's a sense of immunity to scrutiny.
No, I think it's, from what I know about them, I think there's a real lack of efficient governance, administration. And I have my own views why the current GBC, in so many cases, is not able. I think that, I mean, just, and I don't mean just to insult them, but I don't think they're, I think it's a question of one's ability to delegate, one's ability to inspire talented people to sort of join the fray. But what we do know is that in many places, there's a real lack of expert administration in ISKCON. ISKCON is not an expertly managed society, and I think that is a serious problem. And you know, and so in the case of the lady you mentioned, I mean, I do want justice for her. I do care about her, but I think that despite that, or not despite, but maybe alongside that, that I have to be someone who lives by principles. And it may turn out that everything she's saying is exactly the way it is, but there is such a thing as due process or fair process, and it just has to be followed. Now, the fact that ISKCON doesn't have enough people or doesn't have a system to give her that fair process, that I think is the real failing. That ISKCON is not equipped, even though we have so many intelligent people in ISKCON. I think the management is so not great that a lady like that, who's, you know, a respectable lady, and she has, obviously, it's something which she feels very deeply about and which has, you know, been very disturbed about, and that ISKCON has no mechanism to efficiently deal with it.
Yeah, I doubt it's actually even about mechanism or infrastructure or staff. They literally responded to say, we didn't believe we had any obligation to keep you in the form that we were overseeing your case, revising the adjudication, and they've not answered any of her questions.
Yeah, that's just, I guess, what you're saying is, and perhaps making more clear than me, is what I was trying to say, but I think maybe you did it more effectively. And that is, there's a serious problem in the sense that ISKCON is not expertly governed. And like in the case that you're mentioning with this lady, it can result in, you know, people's lives being damaged. And it's a serious problem. And like, I think the connection, and sort of tie all this up, is that like in the case of Vaishnavi gurus, that in its own way, the lack of expert administration is very dangerous. It's dangerous for individual lives, as in the case we're mentioning with the lady in England, you know, and it's a it's I think a dangerous lack of expert administration.
Well, there's also a degree of impunity in just deciding we're not even going to reply to your questions. We're not
Yes.
even going to
Well, that's
dignify
because,
them with a response.
yeah, because if they do that, which they did, there's no possibility of repercussions. There's no one who's going to say, because the GBC, I think this is one of the most unfortunate aspects of the GBC in the last, you know, several decades, is an inability to govern themselves. And I think that people who have not been, you know, I mean, someone really does something ridiculous, you know, found in a bar with a prostitute or something. But I mean, if someone basically follows the principles, chants or appears to chant 16 rounds, there's almost no degree of incompetence, as long as there's not some like huge legal problem that threatens the movement in place. If it's just sort of consistently inadequate, management, then you're still there for life. You're still there for life. And so it's a problem. I think it's a serious problem.
The CPOC came in with a little bit of a fanfare on due process, and we're not critiquing the notion of due process. In fact, we'd love to hear your thoughts about why it's so essential. What we would observe is, in my mind, there's three vital components of child protection function: prevention, education, etc.
Right.
I don't know if that was on the radar when ICPO was disbanded and CPOC was formed in its place. Second thing, investigation stroke adjudications. Obviously, if there are incidences, because prevention isn't going to work 100% of the time, the fact that it's properly investigated, that we come to a conclusion about someone's risk status, about their permissions, and so on, vital, even just by way of there being appropriate deterrent or proper signaling. Like you said, there could be all kinds of debate around whether someone's still a saint, but to keep someone on with that track record as a guru, that sends all kinds of weird signals and sets some very scary precedents for the society. And then the third stream would be victim support, which again, I would argue, doesn't appear to be on the radar of
Victim
the current
support.
CPS.
Yeah,
it's not evident from their dealings at all.
It's as far as that case of the guru, I don't want to, get into a whole big thing about that, and I don't think I'm just what's the word, minimizing or trivializing what actually happened.
I also can't discuss it in any depth because I'm being sued over it.
Oh, okay. So it's obvious to us certain things, and obviously in other parts of the world less obvious, but yeah, I think it's like if the body is unhealthy, all kinds of symptoms, coughing, skin breaking out, fatigue, just all kinds of symptoms, and it can all be emanating from some disease in the body. And so I think the GBC really on an urgent basis needs to find a way to up the standard to be a GBC, and this GBC for life, no matter how much trouble you cause, either by not acting or by the things you do, there's a serious problem. And I think the fact that at least North America, I'm not so much in touch with Europe, but in North America, there's really an uproar over this GBC decision. People are not accepting it. And I'm talking about very loyal, highly placed ISKCON leaders. It's really caused an uproar. And so hopefully it will lead to some improvement. What we really need is, based on my study of history, we need really competent leaders. And if we don't, there'll be so many problems and so many people, so many damaged lives.
I'm mindful that we're probably zeroing in a little bit close to the 2 hours, so I'm keen to start moving into closing out. Due process, why is this so essential?
Because otherwise you're not civilized.
I suspect
that's one of the hallmarks of a civilized country as opposed to a banana republic. Due process just means there's justice. What is a society that doesn't have justice? It's just a mob. It's just a vigilante society.
And I would agree, if you've got ICE, let's say, grabbing someone off the street and throwing them into an overseas concentration camp or prison, and there's not even any testing of their citizenship or process of trial by where they've got a chance to defend themselves or whatever, I agree. And I suspect due process, it'd be interesting to see when it came into being, possibly as early as the Magna Carta or something like that.
Much earlier. In fact,
okay.
Yeah, in fact, I could read you something really quickly. Let's see. Before we talked, I just did a little bit of research.
But it was to rein in the despotic behavior of kings who were beholden to no one other than themselves. That was the whole idea.
They're different.
Ensure that someone had certain civil protections.
Yeah, I mean, there's constitutional monarchy, there's absolute monarchy, there's different. So yeah, the worst kind. It says, let's see, across many civilized legal traditions, Roman law, English common law, modern constitutional systems, and international law, there's broad agreement about the core elements of fair process, often called due process, natural justice, or procedural fairness. The formulations vary, but the underlying principles are remarkably consistent.
And so it is akin to natural justice that if we're really thinking about what is fair, it will occur to us, well, locking somebody up without a fair trial, without a chance to defend themselves, clearly is out of order.
Yes.
And therefore, as you say, independently almost, many different civilizations arrived at the need to say there should be an evidentiary threshold, there should be certain procedures which are followed. I don't think anyone in their right mind would dispute that. However, and a question you've heard me ruminate over, have we inadvertently, in the absence of a charter for the plaintiff, the victim, the accuser, the reporter, have we actually skewed everything to the rights of the accused to the point where actually it now is no longer a fair process for the person bringing the charge, bringing the accusation?
I would say that skewing is certainly more likely in the case where there's an imbalance of power, where the accused has more power, more status, more followers than, and if the accuser, then the accuser. So when there's that, and so you're right to bring that up in a case where the accused person, because generally, if let's say a devotee feels that I was treated abusively in whatever way, and the abuse is alleged to have occurred by an official representative of ISKCON, then there's a certain likelihood, like what class of, let's say, devotees have significant power over others, acting not as private citizens who come to a temple for a program, but acting as representatives of ISKCON. And that's going to tend to be leaders. And that's why, for example, there are, and then you get the imbalance you're talking about. I mean, that's why there are these laws, for example, that, a psychiatrist or a lawyer or a dentist, can't seduce a patient because there's a power imbalance. And so, I mean, I recognize all these things, and I respect and I agree with your idea that, we shouldn't use the principles of due or fair process as a way to sort of protect the accused, but not, the accused, but not the alleged victim. And so, therefore, it has to be done very intelligently and very carefully so that everyone is protected, because lives can be destroyed by failing to believe victims, failing to give them compensatory damages and so on. And lives can also be destroyed, and many lives have been destroyed by a rush to judgment against an accused abuser. So I care about everyone. I don't want to go from one extreme to the other. I just want a competent system of justice, so that to the extent that human beings are capable of it, that we are able to provide justice.
So moving towards wrapping up here, Maharaj, I'm going to just reiterate, because this isn't one in a series that we're looking at here. So I'm going to reiterate the questions that we feel CPOC owes us all an answer to, and the GBC owes us all an answer to. I'm not expecting you to necessarily comment on these, although if it does prompt you to look into the Satna case further, we would absolutely welcome that, your clear thinking on this. So the first one, actually, you possibly do have a view on, and maybe this is a future conversation, a future live stream. Precisely what were the ICPO's supposed shortcomings such that their dissolution and summary dismissal were warranted? Please provide evidence. Now, I think if there was a meeting where, if you wanted to invite Ramatirtha along, and I invited Gandharvika and Kamlesh along, I think it could be very useful just for clearing the air and ensuring we get meaningful learnings out of the whole experience. Because I worry at the moment we've lurched from something that for some reason people wanted changed into something that falls way short of good design. But that's just my...
Yeah, I did offer repeatedly to talk. It was a respectful offer to Kamlesh and his wife, and they absolutely refused. You know, they refused to speak to me.
I'll test if that's still the case, and I'm not too attached either way. I'm just very mindful that you've made quite a few assertions about their performance and bias and so on, but at least they should have the opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Based on my, I think, very careful investigation. And one thing also I should say is that, and I think I am, kind of trained professionally to evaluate evidence. And it's not that I wanted to come to a conclusion. I think I really just investigated with very, very senior, very sober devotees. So, and I should also add, I don't just want to spend all my life, on a vendetta against these people.
No, I fully understand, and I'm not interpreting it as...
Yeah,
I'd like it to be a good faith argument or a good faith discussion all around.
Yeah, and the reason I brought it up is I was pushing back against what I consider to be the false idea. Here we have these people that are doing just a great job. I mean, they did do some things well. I think they really cared about the young people. I think they really, tried hard to protect the young people. And, but I think, and so I'm, I don't, it's not that I'm saying they're, they have no good qualities. And I did ask to speak with them. They did refuse. And I do know for a fact that they refused to turn over. Because that's what the GBC said. Because of all the evidence I presented, the GBC said, well, let us read the trial proceedings so we can see for ourselves. And they refused to turn that over. I also actually did a study of the bylaws for the CPO and found the bylaws were also defective in various ways. Not because someone did this or that, but just as a legal apparatus, it was just there were deficiencies in the bylaws.
So let's aim to have an Istagosti. I'll at least circle back to all the parties and find out everyone's willingness. To me, it would be great to have someone from the CPOC in on that. It would be great to have someone from the GBC EC. This is such an important conversation, at least from my thinking. Prabhupada's trying to develop civilizational level change. He definitely wanted us to do intelligent things and loving things for kids.
Yes,
and
of course.
I would say our scorecard at the moment is seriously deficient.
Not in North America, not right now. There are actually 3 very good schools in North America.
Yes, certainly not everywhere. Look, we're really lucky. We have a good school down the road. But if we're looking at, have we got a good global design that reliably delivers a first-class experience to all the movement's children?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And we absolutely agree. I'm not on a vendetta against anyone, and ultimately I want to do it right. And I feel that if we had competent professionals, people who are really, competent not only in the sense they know all about this stuff academically, but they really care about children. I think if we either have competent professionals or we hire competent professionals, and I don't think, like myself, I don't think I'm at an age where I can, like start a new career now and to really understand, pedagogy, child education. And I would like to see a certain professionalism, like get people who are really have a track record, whether they're devotees or not devotees. It's like when I go to a doctor, it's not that I need a devotee cardiologist. I just need a good cardiologist. And so I would just like to see really competent, like excellent professionals and have them tell me that, what's going right and what's not going right.
Well, your point ties in actually with my next bullet point. So my question is, what types of assessment were used to determine the suitability of CPOC staff to serve in a child protection capacity? Now, to your point about competence, clearly they have legal backgrounds, not necessarily child protection specific. The question is, if we consider the mandate to be prevention and victim support as well as investigations, this is where that lack of experience is absolutely a pertinent question. And what was the procedure that we went through to determine their suitability? But again, I'm not expecting you to answer these things.
For example, I'm in Gainesville, Florida. And just maybe a mile and a half down the road, there's a world-class university. And they have a distinguished school of education, pedagogy. And so I think now at the present time, there's just an extraordinary amount of really good research and knowledge and schools that work and schools that don't work. And so I think it's like when I go to a dentist, I really don't, it may be a devotee, it may not be a devotee. I just want the best dentist I can find. And so I think what we should do is just find the best experts we can find and work with them to set up a world-class school system because the children certainly deserve it. And, ironically, I think we'd attract a lot more intelligent people, especially in the West, not by building all these big temples, but by having great schools. I had a friend who was, he's one of my best friends when I was in middle school and everything. And he became a psychiatrist and he was a professor of psychiatry at the University of California. And he was an atheist. And so whatever I told him, it's just like, no cigar. And then the one time he really kind of said, this is so attractive about ISKCON, is when he visited me one time in the LA Temple, and they had a nice school then. He saw the school, and that's what changed his heart. So the only thing that changed his heart was seeing the school. And so I'm an educator. I've dedicated my life. I do more or less, college level stuff, but I love the kids, and I think it's a sacred, in a sense, it's our first responsibility is to take care of our own children. And
let me just close out quickly with these other questions. Now, I'm not expecting you without first-hand knowledge of the case to necessarily, I'm not going to obviously restrict you from commenting, but I'm just mindful that I'm not trying to draw you into uninformed comments, but I think it's important that these questions are publicly voiced. Why are the new child protection guidelines referred to as the 2023 guidelines when they weren't released till 2025? And there's a logic to asking this because they came out almost simultaneously with the review of this case, with a clause in it that specifically facilitated that review.
I have no idea whatsoever.
No, you wouldn't. And the guidelines that the CPO had used when initially adjudicating the case were the 2018 guidelines, which were published at that time. These 2023 guidelines actually came out in August 2025, but for some reason they've been used to conduct a retroactive review to find the old CPO. So that's very suspicious. Why are you referring to the appellant in the Satna case as the petitioner? So he'd already had his reviews, and there were apparently no more reviews, and yet he's obviously petitioned. We'd like to know who received that petition. Why was it considered again? How did he become aware of the favorable new clause? And even how do you explain the clause? The clause is basically saying, hey, if you committed these offences against children prior to joining ISKCON, that's outside our jurisdiction, which is a bit worrying because that would suggest we turn a blind eye to known risks just because of a technicality.
Right.
Why did you take the petitioner's word for it? They weren't a member of ISKCON at the time, which in fact was misinformation. Why not cross-reference with the victim, which they didn't do inexplicably? What evidence led you to conclude that the rape of a minor was simply teenagers messing around, which is in their now they didn't look at the case, and you've mentioned that the former ICPO may not have been ready to hand the files over. I won't defend or argue their point, but I think it would be interesting to explore what were their reasons. But what we have now is that someone conducted a review of the case without any evidence, without cross-referencing the petitioner's claim. So this, from a due process perspective, this is raising all kinds of strange questions. Why not contact the victim? Why ignore their questions? And is this what we now expect as the new modus operandi? What is CPOC's charter for the handling of victims? So those are the questions that we definitely want CPOC and GBC answers to, because as things stand, it doesn't look like an example of due process. It looks like an example of worrying favoritism and a bias against, in this case.
I if I had any power to do so, I would insist that it really be investigated thoroughly and objectively by qualified experts.
So mindful that we're almost at the 2-hour mark, Maharaj, and I don't want to intrude on your evening too much longer. If you like, we can take some of the questions that are in. What's that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so there may not be time for us to look at every single one of them. So I'll cherry pick. We do have questions from Dakshina. You may know Dakshina was, she is part of the CPO in Europe and the UK. She's certainly disputing quite a few of things that you've said here in terms of not people being excluded from interviews, but actually refuse to give statements. So there's a basic theme here about, can you evidence those matters that you've raised as concerns?
Well, the cases where I said a person was not interviewed was based on a conversation with the person who is made aware of failing governance with related to. You see, this is frankly, I mean, with all due respect to Dakshina, let me tell you what my reaction to this. Could you put it back on the screen there? Made aware of failing governance with Sutton's case was only too quick to wash his hands of it, saying he couldn't help. What I did say, actually, is that what's needed in this case to do it properly is to get someone who has the ability and competence and time to make a thorough investigation. And it's just, I mean, you know, my situation where I can hardly even get a night's sleep. I mean, I have so many things I'm doing. So the fact that in my position, I'm not dropping all my other services to just focus on this, I don't think it's too quick to wash my hands. I didn't wash my hands. I said that it should be investigated, and that's why I agreed to talk with you, knowing that you were going to talk about it. I was more than happy to advocate. No, actually, see, this is the kind of thing I have to deal with. I never advocated for Lakshmimoni. I advocated for a proper trial based on because back then, it was years ago, I did investigate, and too happy to advocate for Lakshmimoni and criticize the GBC's governance. No, the only thing I criticized about the GBC there was that they refused, the GBC chairman did not carry out the vote of the body, which was to, make sure that that the CPO turned over the proceedings. But that's, I mean, just this comment, I don't want to just, attack this young lady, but it's just, it's hard to have an objective discussion. I'm washing my hands of it. I was too quick to criticize. It's not real.
No, I agree. Emotions run high. I think just to look at the essence of the point that she's making, I'm taking to simply be, it appears that there are times where the case is maybe relates to someone closer to you, you're willing to invest time, and there are other times when you're saying, well, that's for others to deal with.
Well, no, I mean, it wasn't a question of someone close to me. I mean, that was a different time in history. I was a member of the GBC. My age was very different. My health was very different. Krishna has given me all kinds of services I didn't have then. And I just think it's human. I mean, to say that in my position where there's probably thousands of people depending on me, I just like drop everything that I'm doing because this lady wrote me a letter. It's not that I don't care about her. In fact, I discussed it with other senior devotees, what could be done. And the thing is, because it took place in the UK, the proper thing would be the UK should do something about it. I mean, I'm happy to write a letter urging them to do so. I didn't wash my hands, and I never, became an advocate for Lakshmani. I was an advocate for fair process. So that's just my experience. It's very hard with the people who are on a particular side to just have a rational conversation about these things.
Well, that's exactly why I think Istagosti is the way to go. And obviously it's just the two of us today, but this emerging idea, possibly having a clear the air, and let's make sure we've got proper facts on the table. I think there is a prevailing view that Kamlesh and Gandharvika were given a bad name and hung. And in fact,
that's not what my research indicated. And I did actually research it. I'm not against them. I wish them well. I offered to speak with them. They refused to speak with me. My impressions or testimonies that influenced my views came from some of the most respectable devotees of ISKCON who are like sort of universally respected for having good character. And it's like, so Kamlesh and his wife refused to speak to me. And then when the plenary GBC voted that he should turn over the records of the case so it could be investigated. I mean, so he could be exonerated if he was innocent. He refused to turn it over. And he said, I'm not going to do it. I'll quit, but I'm not going to turn it over. So every time I made an effort to include Kamlesh in the process, I was turned down.
Well, like I said, let me check whether or not that's still the case. I definitely think there would be high value in having, in business, in project management, they often have something called the post-implementation audit or the post-implementation review. So I don't know that we've done a lessons learned from former CPO and brought those lessons into new CPO. As I say, if testing one grain of rice tells you whether the pot's cooked or not, the Satna case provides a lot of very worrying things that, in fact, things have gone seriously backwards. But that may be unfair if it's just one case and so on. But I do think that clearing the air would be important. I mean, I'm not going to only quote from Dakshina, although she's been very active. This is the point that she's making. If we're saying that they've ruined people's lives, let's have some evidence to back that up. I'm not expecting you to necessarily provide that here and now, although you're welcome
to.
So
Dakshina, her latest comment, which you just put, you don't get to throw around accusations like that and provide no example to evidence. Well, we had we went over for months, a couple of months on the GBC forum, and I provided a lot of evidence. So again, this Dakshina, you're talking about being open-minded. This is what I get all the time. If you don't line up on a certain side of these things, you're accused of, I don't get to do this. This person, Dakshina, with all due respect, has no idea whatsoever about how I conducted myself, the quality of the investigation I did, no idea whatsoever. And yet she appears to believe that she knows all these things. She doesn't have any idea of the evidence I acquired, the people I talked to, no idea whatsoever.
But the call for evidence isn't unreasonable, right?
What's that?
The call to say, can we substantiate?
No, but put that back on the screen.
People's lives.
Back on the screen, if you could, please.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me scroll back to that. Yeah, here we go. This was the comment, although there's several comments.
You don't get to throw around accusations like that and provide no example to evidence. I don't, in other words, what this person is saying is, and then I think I really do have to go, is that if I did, in good faith, did a long investigation and found certain things, I don't have a right to speak?
No, I think she's saying that something like a comment like ruined people's life requires substantiation.
Okay. And yeah. And I said, hopefully my files are still there. I hope they are. I spent months on this. I did investigate carefully. I didn't take hearsay. I only spoke to people who knew about these things. And so to say that unless I, post all this stuff, I'm not allowed to even sort of report in a preliminary sense, this is what I found. I'm not allowed to do that.
I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing.
Well, if you put it on the screen,
that needs substantiating. That's all I'm hearing.
I think if you put it on the screen, I think that was the language, not allowed. If I got it wrong, then I'm sorry, but.
Yeah, I think we have an impassioned. You don't get to throw around accusations like that without providing examples.
I mean, first of all, I don't get to do it. In other words, and throw around accusations like that.
It's impassioned for sure.
Yeah, but you see, I don't think I've ever had the experience of discussing. I mean, maybe you're the first time. Because also, I mean, what about the fact that she's, accusing me of just defending Lakshmi Moni, despite the fact, and this is like, there's nothing that I can say. There are no words. I can say it 1,000 times. I never defended Lakshmi Moni. I did not once say that she was innocent. I simply said, fair trial, and whatever a fair trial decides, I will accept it. If there's a fair trial and they say she's guilty, I'll accept it. If they say she's innocent. And yet, it just goes on and on. Probably for the next 30 years, they'll be saying, I was defending Lakshmi Moni, when in fact, I never said one word in defense of Lakshmi Moni. I was simply calling for proper, fair process. And yet, so it's just, I mean, that's why it's hard to speak to these people, because I would say they're not great listeners. And so, I said this, I was accused of, by the person you had on, last time I saw you, I was accused of, sort of like promoting child abuse. Now,
Krishna Devata said that? I didn't remember that.
No, not Krishna Devata.
Oh.
That time we talked, Seneca. I mean, I was accused, there was one Gurukuli girls went crazy. I mean, we were accused, Brahmatirtha, Bhakti, who are just like, there aren't two better people in the world, and what they've done for youth. And just, it's funny because I'm not allowed to make accusations, even when I've done a lot of research, but this person is allowed to make accusations without research. But anyway, I don't want to just, I don't want to just attack this lady, but that's why I am in favor. I did not say literally one word to defend Lakshmi Moni, not one word.
I think the solution is maturista ghosti for these things, and hopefully we can have a putting to rest an agreed narrative for a particular chapter in time.
Yeah.
I like the idea of having, you inviting Brahmatirtha or anyone else that you feel has a vital perspective, and possibly giving, Kamlesh and/or Gandharvika and team a chance to talk their perspectives through.
I tried to talk to them.
Yeah. Well, let's give it another go. I've got no guarantee that, time has changed anything or that my entreaties will be any more successful. But it does strike me that it's unfortunate that we now have two competing narratives. One is they were biased and possibly not following due process and needed to be replaced by something that we now have, CPOC. The other is possibly that they were not as cooperative as the GBC might have liked, and the GBC have now picked more cooperative.
No, actually, it's the opposite.
Okay.
It's the in the sense that when the director, CPO director, refused to turn over the proceedings, I mean, if it was such a fair trial, he would have been eager. No, read this. Here's the evidence. Here's the evidence that it was fair, and yet, refused to turn it over, and the GBC chairman did nothing to make him turn it over, and his being, removed from that position came many years after all the evidence. So to say that there was some one-sided accusation and the next thing you know, this person's being fired, no, it's very different. Actually, nothing happened, and whatever motivated the GBC to make that change it's not even directly related to what I'm talking about, because it came many years later. And again, I did make efforts to discuss with this person who didn't want to talk to me. So, and what can I say?
Yeah, and let's see. It may go nowhere, but they might be inclined to want to say, this is why we weren't comfortable about handing the files over, or whatever. I can't speak for them.
I'm sure they had a reason, whether it was, but the problem is, however uncomfortable they were, that's the system Prabhupada gave us.
Yeah, I believe the reason has more to do with legal privacy laws and so on, in terms of who should be able to see such transcripts.
Well, I wish, if that were the case, of course, you can just black out the actual names, but if that was actually the case, no one ever said me. I mean, no one on the GBC said, well, the reason we can't do that is because of this or that. You can always black out the names, and you can, again, and also talking to some of the most respectable devotees in the Hare Krishna movement who, personally said, yeah, I heard this directly from that person. So, do we not have...
As we said earlier, sunlight's the best disinfectant. Let's see if we can have a conversation. Otherwise, it might be one of those chapters that's forever he said, she said, which is not really.
At this point, I kind of exited the whole thing. We were writing to each other, and after a while, he did not respond.
Oh, you're looking at the comments now, are you?
Yeah, Gandharvika. We were writing to each other. After a while, he did not respond.
Oh, I don't even know where that comment is. Sorry, I'm scrolling here. Where's that comment?
Toward
the bottom?
Yeah, at the top of Gandharvika. They're all from Gandharvika.
Oh, I'm not seeing those comments. There you go. Oh, you're looking maybe in private chat. I understand. Yeah, okay.
It's one of her comments is, you find, anyway, I don't know, maybe it's just a typo, a strong view on LMDD with also no evidence. There was a lot of
Let's not try and do it like this, Maharaj. With just
I know. But I guess the reason I'm reading that is why I don't think I would like to discuss it, because it's just so again, not allowed to share the victim statement. I meant, well, you could just leave out the victim statement and show us the rest of it. So I don't want to. At this point in my life, I'm not on a vendetta against Kamalesh and Gandharvika. And I did make a study. I do know what I know.
I think it would be nice for them to have a chance to describe their reasoning, because at the moment we're leaving it that they've been accused of bias and ruining people's lives and so on. And so I wouldn't like to leave that without any chance for them to reply. Of course, it's up to you whether you want to participate in a future conversation. No questions there. I do hope have a CPOC, GBC conversation about this, because at the moment it feels like we are barreling ahead. There are a lot of questions. The questions aren't being responded to.
And I will even say to Gandharvika, I don't know if she's ever going to hear this, is that I'm not attached to my view. It's not that I want to think something about her or about her husband. It's not that I need to think that, or I want to think that, or I'm envious of them. But I did actually study. And so if I'm wrong, Krishna knows it. So it's not something I talk about. I mean, you brought it up, so
I'll circle back. I'll test everybody's appetite, and I'll circle back and see. And obviously, it's completely at your discretion, Maharaj.
I mean, I don't. Yeah, it's not something that I really at this point in my life I really talk about. It's because if I speak to Gandharvika or Kamalesh, then I would have to fact check what they tell me. Of course, maybe they have some documentation. I have documentation. So,
and what we hope is it truly is this the ghosty, where it's actually not about attacking or defending, but it's about finding a way forward that serves Prabhupada's movement most effectively.
Yeah, I was one thing that really kind of soured me on this whole thing is that I was accused so much, even in your chat today. You see, like in your chat, I tried to make clear, I said it over and over again, I never defended Lakshmani. I never said she was.
I'm hearing that.
Yeah, and yet you got a comment, we got a comment today saying that you defend, I just, this impression that I took Lakshmani's side and was I thought she was innocent. I've kind of given up trying to explain these things.
Well, exactly why I think just having problematic narratives on the loose, that's exactly why Ista Ghosty is meant to be there. Let's get an understanding. Let's get a shared understanding and a shared plan. That to me would be constructive and mature.
It would be very instructive and very mature. And based on my experience, I'm not sure something could be achieved.
The lost art of Ista Ghosty, or maybe we never had it as a competence. All right, Maharaj, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you for your perspectives. I hope this has been, a pleasant experience for you, notwithstanding some of the questions that have been asked.
Well, I mean, I certainly enjoyed getting to know you a little better. And I do apologize if I have misstated any case. I am not so attached to always being right. I mean, I think chanting Hare Krishna has done some good for me. And if I've, made statements which are inaccurate or exaggerated or whatever, I apologize for them. I'm not aware of what they are at this point. I remember talking, for example, to the GBC chairman, fighting with the GBC about getting the transcripts and them telling me we can't get them. This, came from the people who are trying to get them. So maybe they were turned over. I don't know when they were turned over. I don't know what the date is, whether it was years later or the next day. But everything I said here, to the best of my knowledge, is based on things that but if I made a mistake, if I misunderstood, then I sincerely regret that. And I don't really think I'm attached to being right.
And as I said, Maharaj, we'll give you the opportunity. Obviously, they deserve the opportunity to at least describe their side of things, and then it's up to you. I'll certainly send on, if they record, I'll certainly send that on to you, and it's completely up to you if you'd like to participate further. Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you. It's you're a good guy.
Very kind of you, Maharaj. Thank you so much for giving of your time, and I will obviously forward on any other questions and things that come through, so you've got an opportunity to respond. Hare Krishna.
Okay. All the best to you.
Haribol.
Haribol.